So we're review last week. So basically what we covered was we're still in the first Ikar, and we were talking about the problem of God and free will. What can God do and what can God not do? So we kind of came out, according to Shitas Rambam and Rav Sadia Gaon, that, the whole idea of God deciding, I'm bored, I'm time to retire, so God creates another God, and he retires to Hawaii. And while in Hawaii, he's trying to figure out how to create a square, whereas its diagonal is the same length as its sides, and he's able to do that. And so he thinks, oh great, now that I've defied reality, I'll create a rock that I can't lift. And becoming so depressed that he can't lift, or maybe he can lift a rock that he can't lift, he commits suicide. These things, the Rambam says, cannot be.
That whole scenario, or the little part?
That every part of it, the whole scenario. That's as a joke. As a joke. So that's Shitas Rambam. We saw Rav Moshe Teku asserting no, Hashem can do whatever he wants. And the way I kind of framed this was that both views were kind of looking at paradox and free will in very different ways. Whereas for the Rambam, because we're dealing with Hashem, there has to be a paradox hiding somewhere. The paradox when it comes to Hashem is, how can a thing unlike his creation relate to his creation? The thing which created love, how can he care about his creation? That's also a created concept. So that's the paradox that the Rambam is left with. For Rav Moshe Teku, the paradox is the essence of Hashem himself. Hashem can do whatever he wants when he wants. He can create the rock he can't lift, and then he's able to lift it. The second issue that came out of this machlokus was the idea of free will when it comes to Hashem. For Rav Moshe Teku, this idea of Hashem can do anything ends up that Hashem has infinite potential. Whereas for the Rambam, Hashem's free will is defined by actuality. His essence does do a thing. And because his essence does do a thing, it doesn't mean that he's limited. Whereas Rav Moshe Teku, because he's more potential-oriented, says, technically it is. That's more or less the dispute between these two views. We segued into proofs. Proofs of the existence of God. The whole structure of a proof, kind of laid out, is a proof is linking two ideas. God exists because. That's how proofs function. You're linking two prepositions. The idea of exists, the idea of God. And there are three proofs. The teleological argument, an argument of design. The cosmological argument, an argument of causes, simple causes creating more complex effects. And an argument from historical experience. Proofs are nice, but proofs don't get the job done. And I don't think I've met anybody who has become religious because of some amazing proof he run across. And we covered a couple different reasons why. Proofs, number one, are going to have to stand up against the confirmation bias. We, by definition, are always looking for the thing we know already. And it's genuinely difficult to actually learn new material because of our biases. We have a problem with belief. We touched on this a couple of sessions back with Rabbi Yonasan, that belief limits free choice. If I believe the world is flat, I'm going to stop sailing my ship at a certain point because I don't want to fall off. We also have the problem that each proof is coming from a different philosophy of science, and I really might not appreciate the cosmological argument because it fundamentally isn't the way I look at the world. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means I can't appreciate it on any level. The way we process facts are emotionally based. I said, the only time you're going to be able to remember your wedding is when you're in a good mood, because God willing, I hope you had a good wedding. But when you're angry, that's going to be near impossible to remember actually loving this idiot who keeps leaving his socks on the floor. And just in general, we have more of like an existence-y problem with proofs that we're complex creatures. We have a mind, we have a body, we have emotions, and proofs to be compelling, as opposed to truthful. Being right is different. To be compelling, you really have to tap into all three aspects of what makes us people. Well, proofs do a really, really good job of only accessing one. They intellectually make sense. They're a proof. Preposition A, preposition B are linked together because of we have some justification that links the two. That's pretty heady. Doesn't really. It's very difficult to feel anything when it comes to logic. So today what we're going to do is we're going to cover two of the three arguments for the existence of God. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline the basic argument, the problems with it, and where both people who buy into the argument and people who don't buy into the argument, what problems do they have to live with? It's kind of cool when you look at L.C.S.W. It takes a long time to look at L.C.S.W. There's actually no proof for the existence of God in all of the Gemara. You have to go to Tanaic text to do that. Now, it's interesting sort of like, development of halacha sort of thing. The way Shas was constructed was really by taking earlier Tanaic texts that were written by the Tanaim, and kind of like giving the Cliff Note version of these very long proofs of how psukim were understood. So there we do find two different types of proofs offered, the cosmological and the teleological argument. But in Shas itself, you don't have that. The Shas is a book of psak. When you look in the Gemara, what you are only going to find is halacha. How should one live today? That's the concern. It's not a history book. It's not a book on medicine. It's not interesting story time. These things show up in the text. We do have a gada. We do have interesting medical advice that pops in different mesechtas. But it's never really for the purpose of just schmoozing, but they have halachic significance. When it comes to medication, when you see some of the medical advice given in Shas, in fact, the Gaonim, Rav Shir Gaon and Rav Hai Gaon, in their tshuvas, wrote that you're probably liable to kill yourself if you try some of these things. Don't use them. But the halachic significance is not about the prescribed medical advice, but you should be willing to take great lengths to protect your health, even if it sounds a little nuts. Within reason. That's so weird. But even if it's a little nuts, you have to take your own health seriously. It was things like aches and pains. That was usually what Chazal were dealing with. So it's probably placebo. No, it probably worked vis-a-vis placebo effect. Like honest to goodness. It was a really, really cool study. They it matters who your doctor is. They were taking patients who were coming in with severe pain and giving them analgesics, painkillers. Mm-hmm. And so the first group of doctors, their job is to give the real medication, give the real painkiller, but just be standoffish. Just give them the medication and run. Like, don't talk to them, don't look at them. Just give them the silly meds. Group B, they were supposed to use all the skills they ever learned as doctors of having good bedside manner, really engaging the patient, showing they care, but they're being given a placebo, a medication that it's not a medication. It has no active ingredients whatsoever. It's sugar, the sugar pill. So it turned out, on average, the people who were seeing the very nice doctors were having greater effect of relief of pain than the first group of doctors. So placebo effect is a very. I once saw. Oh man, I once saw.
What's the point of ever giving people medications?
Well, no, you have to do both because active ingredients do help. So you're always, as a doctor, as a therapist, you're always trying to really cash in on both. You want to get the placebo, and you also want to get the fact that what you're doing actually works. They had this before. They used to have these wild studies before they started making laws not to do them. Ethical reasons, that they had people coming in with cardiac problems. They were going to come in for open heart surgery. And group A was told, okay, they're going to get the normal surgery, and I think like the effect, the success rate was like 70% or something like this. And they got the normal surgery, and sure enough, it was the average that everyone was aware of. Group B come in, they crack them open. I mean, when you're doing heart surgery, you're breaking your rib cage open. They just open them up,
And close them
go out, take a smoke, come back, close them right back up. But they were told, this is a experimental, state-of-the-art surgery we're going to do. The success rates are phenomenal, and we're expecting a full recovery. And sure enough, they had way better results than the first group.
Even with the risk
So
of infection, that's
illegal.
actually really chill.
I mean, yeah.
Oh my god.
Illegal. I love that so much.
I'm chill with that.
Yeah, you can't get away with that today.
Okay at all.
Is that only with like heart arrhythmias? Like, why did they do that? Like, did they make sure that like this person
It
had
clear.
actual like?
Yes, they
problems?
all did. They had clogged arteries. The arteries
Like-
worked themselves out.
Well.
Human body's weird.
Interesting.
Human body's weird. All right.
That's so cool, actually.
Yeah. So that's what Shas is. Shas is a book of psak. So you always have to kind of interpret, well, why am I being given this information? It has to lead to some sort of halachic significance on some level. We're not just schmoozing. The same thing as like the Chumash is not a history book. Although it is historically accurate, this purpose is not to recount history. It does a pretty poor job of it. I mean, we just skip, everything until Avram Avinu. I mean, it's a really bad history book if its purpose was that. It's obviously not a history book.
Sounds like the ones in American school systems.
Yeah, there you go. So we're going to cover the teleological argument first, and we find this in Bereshis Rabbah. Again, one of these Tanaic texts that are the prototype for Shas. So this is what it offers. This is the medrash. So imagine a man walking from one place to another, and along the way he sees a palace on fire. Would he ever say that this palace does not have a caretaker who manages it? The owner of the palace appears and says to this guy, I'm the owner of the palace. So this describes Avram Avinu. And his experience, his rational experience with discovering God. That would you say he thought, that this world has no one who manages it? So the Holy One, blessed be He, appeared when Avram said this. And said that I'm the owner of the world. I manage it. So there's a lot of really cool aspects of this measure. So I'm going to kind of break it down. I'll indulge me in symbolic playing around with the medrash. But it's like we have almost like four different types of order that are described here. And I kind of think of it almost as like, clean order and dirty order. The world is either going towards order or it's going towards chaos. In the one sense, we have this man walking from one place to another. There's location, there's reference points. The world has to make sense to get from point A to point B. There's order in the world. And there's chaos. The palace is incredibly intricate and it's on fire. It's going from order to nothingness. And we have a traveler and we have an owner. A traveler is someone who hasn't actualized himself in any serious respect. He's in transit. He's not doing anything except getting from point A to point B. Whereas an owner, especially a king, let's say, is someone who has very much actualized himself in the world. Again, different types of order. What's interesting is that this traveler in the Medrash, he's speaking to an audience, speaking to you. Would you ever say ... And it seems like the symbolism there is truth is a communal thing. You can't have an individual truth. My personal truth or whatever people say, that doesn't exist. We're in relationship to things always. If you think about your own lives, you are different. You are a different person when you're with your mom. You would definitely not be joking around the same way that you guys do unless your mom's really cool, But you are different people with whoever you are. And then you think about, well, who are you when you're alone? Probably uncomfortable, just like everyone else. We need to have people. So truth doesn't exist in a vacuum. What's also kind of cool about this medrash is it almost like a little bit challenges this idea that there is order, because after all, the palace is on fire. Like, there are things within a well-ordered world that seems to be, at first blush, is there order here? It just looks like a big balagan, you know? Big, huge bonfire doesn't exactly look like there's structure. But even that, the process of the unfolding of destruction does follow an orderly sort of a pattern, in the sense of from complex to nothingness. Even that has an order to it on a meta level. And finally, again, this idea that we are interacting with, that truth is a communal event, also implies moral conduct. Has to exist. If we can only receive truth, well, there has to be some rules that govern our behavior vis-a-vis one another to receive that truth. So even in a teleological argument, the proto-justification for morality is already there.
Can you explain that again?
That even though we don't necessarily get from a teleological argument what morality should look like in so much detail, just the fact that it's something that two people have to receive implies, well, two people have to get along. You have to at least be able to tolerate some other person's presence long enough to receive that truth. We need some moral conduct, at the very least, just like, biting your tongue and bearing it, bare minimum, moral conduct in order to receive truth.
Yeah.
And this idea of manager as opposed to, say, owner, that there is intention in design. What's also kind of cool about this medrash is that the person is asking the question to begin with. It's like, because he asked the question, the answer presents itself. This is kind of almost like weaponizing the confirmation bias, because, in a sense, we only use the world in a tool-like way. Everything's a tool. Everything's a solution to a problem. Even like, the color on these walls is a solution to the ugly gray that's beneath them. Everything is a tool to solve a problem. And so as soon as you ask a question, you're looking at the world, what tool can I use to solve this question? It's a way of getting on top of yourself almost, because there is a certain level of instinct people are pushed around by. A large part of the Musar movement, especially from the Litvish side of things, really is all about trying to find these meta tricks to get on top of yourself, to orient yourself in a way where you make the choice back here, and, well, human behavior will unfold the way it does, but because you made that free choice here, that's where you make your money, so to speak. That's how you get your halacha and haba, how you create your world and let it unfold in that one moment. It's not like denying that people have instinct, and it can't get around the fact that, there's like, 100 plus years of research in psychology and sociology that, like, human behaviors are predictable. But you can set up human behavior. That's where most free choice, I think, lies. In the Sefer or Yisrael, they're actually, the author there is very much, Rav Yisrael Salant is tackling that problem. It's like, well, if that's really the case, how could you ever justify getting schar for the outcome of your initial choice? If it's determined, based on that initial choice, well, maybe you don't have any right to what follows.
Remind me if schar is reward or punishment?
Reward.
Okay.
Reward, yeah. So, he just kind of doubles down and says, okay, yeah, fair point, but you know what? Your behaviors are always going to be linked to that first choice you made. You can't separate them into two things. He kind of almost like attacks the kasha. He attacks the difficulty against this idea. He's like, no, like, they're not the choice and everything that follows. Behavior unfolds as like almost like it's a living thing. You can't break it into parts like that necessarily. So he by attacking the question, he saves the idea. He avoids answering it, sort of. It's cool. It's a cool sort of way of answering problems. But by asking questions, we will automatically find solutions. Like the average person is exposed to like 5 or 10 pictures of a cow every day. How often have you noticed it? Now that I've mentioned it, go see how many times you notice a cow. It's going to be on the milk carton. It's going to be on the commercial. It's going to be on the truck. It's going to be, you just find cows everywhere. But yeah, how many did you notice today? You're going to notice a couple now. So what's the structure of the teleological argument? Now that I give this nice measures, let's get back to business. It has 2 steps. If you want to make an argument from design, you got to do 2 things. Your job is to show that the world itself shows there's some sort of design or intelligent planner, and that it is fitting to, once you see there's a design, then you have to say, okay, well, yes, there's design, and someone or something did it. Those are the two steps you got to take. So the classic difficulty against the way the teleological argument's set up is, well, who says that thing is God? Fair enough, maybe something complex organized what you see, but do you have to really go so far as to say that it's God? It's a big jump. The difficulty misses the point of the teleological argument, because it's not just that we're arguing one thing looks like it was designed. It's not like we're saying 10 things were designed. We're saying that the whole gosh darn world looks like it's designed. The whole universe looks like it's designed. It's an argument of proportionality. It's very difficult to start saying, well, some slightly more complex thing made this. You're going to have to say something more complex than all of existence made existence. Sounds an awful lot like God when you put it that way. The other battleground that the argument from design has to sort out is defining design. Because you can posit something like, protection or beauty or, physical benefit. I mean, design means there's a function. It produces something. So there's kind of a gray area when it comes to things like art. Well, is art designed intelligently? Especially when you look at modern art. I mean, they just threw paint all over the place. Yeah.
I have a lot of feelings about Jackson.
I got a lot of feelings about modern art too. I mean, in fact, that is the point of modern art, in the sense of being the very postmodernist sort of view of there is no inherent meaning in the world. And so that is actually the point. It's well, yeah, there's no order because there's no order. So it's kind of this sort of argument is really pushing, are we being subjective in how we define design? So it's kind of on this point, you can kind of go one of 2 ways. You can say, okay, fine, fair enough. Point taken. So at the very least, things that are designed with purpose were designed with intelligence to achieve that purpose. You kind of make both prepositions one. But even still, you're still left with an argument from design. It doesn't really hurt the argument, that sort of criticism. Art is designed intelligently. Those artists, you really can't have a kid just throw paint on a wall. There really is forethought. It is designed with forethought and intelligence, and it really has a artistic quality. I mean, you can even they have I've seen a couple different research projects on this where you can actually measure by observation, as we the onlookers on things like modern art, that this looks like it was designed with skill as opposed to just a kid. So even though it's you'd think it wasn't, it's something it is measurable. There is a measurable level of design even in modern art. So it's basically, the argument being, well, yeah, we've achieved something that has we've achieved something which is reasonably effective, like the human eye. We did it. The human eye is something which has complex design. It has a function to it. That would be something that we'd kind of come out of this more limited definition in light of this kasha. The biggest confusion, I think, when it comes to the argument from design, whether you're reading, if you ever read the God Delusion, the big difficulty that that Dawkins has is he almost makes it sound like religious people are just trying to describe science by putting God in there. It's called the God of the gaps arguments. It's like the more science, the way he puts it, is the more science describes the universe, there are less hiding places for God to be. Used to be once upon a time, we'd ask, well, why does the sun rise? Because God wills it so.
And now
Well,
we have explanations.
Right. Now we have explanations. That's the God of the gaps. It's like the gap God hides is getting smaller and smaller. That's the metaphor. But from an argument from design perspective, no, that's great. We want to limit the God of the gaps as much as possible because the whole idea is the more research that we have, the more description of our universe we have, well, that we're just showing there is intelligent design. We want no gaps. That's great to believe in God. So it's the exact opposite.
Is that what Judaism preaches? Because a lot of people talk about like how their science so much coincides with like the fact that Hashem made us like down to the molecule, everything, how it all works.
Right. And that would be one way of looking at, even if we kind of accept, well, maybe something like the human eye can come out by a chance. There's so many things that are so well organized. The whole thing is well designed. And if we were, just 1 degree off in the way the Earth orbits, just life would not have been able to develop at all. So it's the more we reduce those gaps, the better the argument for design becomes. What's kind of interesting is that just like in that medrash, the way that I'm framing this, that the way we see design very much bespeaks what the characteristics of the Creator is. First and foremost, we have a God that seems to want to relate, because he does. He created the thing, and he created with intention. We have a complex world that is design-based, but is really, really good at being an awesome platform for moral living. I mean, that's all of human history is a discussion of how to live morally. We would only be able to have that question if the whole setup allowed it to be. So we know that whatever created this world is kind of interested in morality. And the fact that it's not just that the universe makes sense. That's complicated enough. We ourselves were designed in such a way to grasp the design. So it's already like the complexity is multiplicative. It's not just the world is complex and yet is designed with intention, but we see it. There's this relationship. So it's almost like, well, God kind of wants to be known. That's one way of thinking about it. There's almost a question being asked. Do you see me over here? Because he enabled us to see the complexity. This well-designed complexity. So where does this lead people who want to reject this argument? Well, they have a really, really bad pool of alternatives. You're not going to see anybody try and attempt to argue that the universe isn't based on design. At best, you might have someone say something like, well, we know in our solar system or we know in our galaxy there's design. Who's to say that maybe in some far-flung galaxy, well, maybe it's just a balagan over there. That's a dumb argument. I've seen the argument. It's a dumb argument. Why would I think that our entire galaxy filled with countless stars isn't enough for me to say, I got a nice pool of data showing that design is the rule? why would I ever think it's not the rule somewhere else? Another hit they have to take, if you don't like the argument from design, is you'd have to posit that there's like multi-universes in order to support this idea that, like, statistically, like you were saying, like there's just so much that if one thing is off, that life itself wouldn't exist. I mean, let alone and even that's a very small question vis-a-vis all of design, you know. But even that small question, you have to posit a multiverse to have an infinite amount of chances to then somehow justify, well, maybe, you know, you can wiggle the statistics in your favor that, okay, it is by chance. You know? It's a dumb argument because you can, you know, everything is statistically possible. That's not the same thing as likely or, you know, feasible. I mean, you always have, just by the nature of the way that we can't collect all data, you're always going to have a little bit of a suffix. And it's not because there really is. It's just you can't collect all data. There's going to always be a smidgen of doubt. So it's kind of an underhanded argument to make because it's not being honest about how statistics works. You never have 100%. So we can't collect an infinite amount of data. That's the more or less the way of looking at it. And it's easier to posit a multiverse than to actually prove one exists.
It's easier to what?
It's easier to say there are an infinite amount of universes than to actually show it exists. There is no evidence to suggest definitively that there are infinite amount of universes. Mm-hmm. You can throw it in as an interesting idea in physics models, but that's like it's almost like, well, could certain equations in physics work if there is an infinite amount of universes is very different than actually knowing or having evidence that such a thing exists. You know, it's more scientists being interesting and having a good time when they do that sort of thing than anything else. It's like, you know, it was the halacha equivalent of what would be the halachas if you lived in the world of Star Trek. You know, you guys watch Star Trek? Yeah, there you go. You know, so like, you know, do you have Shabbos in space, or, you know, would it be a malacha if you go through the opening door, and like, well, how do the sensors work? You know, like, oh, come on, give me a break. You know, it's like, it's not. There's no such thing as Star Trek. You're just having a good time.
Yeah.
So those are the things that, if you don't like this argument, you're going to be left with. Having to believe in infinite universes, and what are you going to do? I mean, just, let alone what are you going to do with human consciousness? You know, things like this. You know, the from rocks to thinking problem. You know, no one has an answer to that. And again, well, you know, the counter argument would be, you know, like, you know, God of the gaps. It's like, I don't think that's a God of the gap sort of problem. And even if we could show, you know, it's kind of like from a teleological argument, you win both ways. If we could show how consciousness can come from rocks, well, I just have more design. Good for me. And, well, if we can't, still good for me, because there's not even the slightest answer to that problem. It beckons a sort of, you have to look at the world fundamentally differently in order to answer that problem. It seems more than a science question, I guess is my point. From a religious perspective, what do we come away with? You know, if we take on the teleological argument, we don't exactly get Judaism. We do get certain things, like I was mentioning. We get, well, God kind of wants to be known. We have some sort of idea of a moral, a morality that seems to sit nicely in the world. A God that can relate to his creation. But that's really all we get. So if in a very vague sense, does Judaism fit that description? Yeah, it definitely does. But so does every other religion. So you don't actually get Judaism with this argument. The next one we're going to cover today is the cosmological argument. This one's found in Medrash Truma. And this one involves our buddy Rabbi Akiva. He was approached by a heretic, and the heretic challenges Rabbi Akiva, you know, who created the world? And Rabbi Akiva says, well, Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world. So the heretic challenges him again. So show me proof. So Rabbi Akiva says, well, looking at what this guy is wearing, he says, well, what is it that you're wearing? And he says, oh, well, I'm wearing a piece of clothing. It's a nice scarf. Who made it? A clothing maker. So the dialogue kind of goes on like that, for a couple different rounds. And the whole point of the proof is there is a first cause to your scarf. It's not exactly an argument from design, although they overlap in many ways. But the whole point is that something had to cause what you got. So in order to create this argument, to build a good proof of creation from a cosmological perspective, so we're positing cause and effect, that causes are necessary for the effect to occur, that you're going from simplistic to complex, and time is not infinite. Those are going to have to be things you assume for this argument to make sense. The elephant in the room is, and this is the big one, is time finite? Seems pretty safe to say it is. As far as what our buddies, the scientists, have to say about the creation of the universe and its expansion, it seems to be that's a fair argument to make.
That time is finite?
That time is finite. What if it's not? What if one day we decide we've got enough evidence to say the universe does actually recycle itself? Time is infinite. Doesn't address...
That doesn't address the human aspect.
It definitely doesn't address that aspect. I mean, we kind of we can take, my feeling about it is it may one day be the cosmological argument can take a hit. I don't think it's likely. I really don't think it's likely. But if it does, we got the argument from design. It's not the end of the world. And anyway, usually the way that physicists kind of describe the infinite time is they kind of have as a cutoff that time actually is a part of the known universe, and that it could very well be there's like a behind the curtain sort of thing. The way that Stephen Hawking kind of describes it is that, well, I mean, time is a material. It started to exist at the moment of the Big Bang. Now, it could be there's something behind that, but that whatever's behind the beginning of time, well, that's not going to be time, number one. And number two, it's going to be so dramatically different than the rules of physics we all know and love in this reality. So suffice it to say, I kind of look at that and say, well, that kind of sounds like God. Not in a God of the Jewish people sort of way, but again, this sort of something that is not the universe and is a type of first cause. So even if we're going to have sort of recycling universe problem, we can still posit a cause and effect. We can still have a cosmological argument that we can play around with. One really good reason I don't think that that's the case. See, the early philosophers were dealing with this idea because Aristotle did believe that time was infinite and there was no such thing as creation. So he was hit on all sides by the infinite. He was hit by the infinite regress problem, meaning to say we have infinite amount of time, and we're here. So an infinite amount of moments in time would have to pass for us to arrive here in this moment, where you guys are sitting in my class. Well, wait a second. You'd have to pass through an infinite amount of time to get here. How did you get here? You would never actually arrive at this moment in time. There's an infinite amount of moments in time you have to get through to get to here. Different philosophers like this, other philosophers don't. I think it's a fair way of looking at time. You can do with that as you will with that argument. But nevertheless, that's more or less what we get from the cosmological argument. So where are we left with? As far as those that reject this argument, they're going to have to take on infinite amount of time. They're going to have to tackle the problems that poses. How do you get to this moment in time? Does the actual nature of the universe demonstrate there's an infinite amount of time? Doesn't seem like that's the case. Seems like it's a fair argument to make. That there is a moment, that time is something which came into existence at the moment of the Big Bang. And honestly, is there this curtain behind creation that Stephen Hawking was talking about? Maybe there is. And is that God? Sounds like the way we describe him from our religious texts of that which cannot be described. What do we religious folks come out of this with this argument? We still don't get the God of the Jewish people. Simply don't. Next week, I'm going to offer the last proof for the existence of God, which is going to be the argument from history. Argument from the Kuzari, more or less, in his Sefer is presenting. That is a very pragmatic argument for the existence of God. It's not just some interesting backflip sort of logical maneuvers we produce, but rather, well, what is our lived experience? Does our lived experience actually justify our belief in the existence of God? That's what we're going to tackle next week.